The president repeals DACA. A state senator and legal immigrant gives us his opinion. Welcome to the Mike Broomhead Show.
Well, I got a message, I got a song. Can I get a witness? Tell me what's going on. I show the people I've been away.
State Senator Steve Montenegro, born in El Salvador, joins the show to talk about DACA here in just a few moments, but we start every show off with something we call The Sweep. Now, The Sweep is sponsored by my good friends at Zero Res Carpet and Tile Cleaning. Talk to you a little bit about them in a few moments. Let's start with DACA. The president repeals it, but the announcement was made by the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. This is how he started that press conference.
The program known as DACA that was effectuated under the Obama administration is being rescinded.
Now, the reason why they did this is because this was just a memorandum issued by President Obama dictating to Homeland Security and others how they would handle these kids. They call them the Dreamers. They meet a certain criteria of when they were brought here by their parents, in school, what they're doing, and there's a lot of people that are hiding under DACA and people that don't belong here. But it belongs in the hands of the legislature, the legislative branch, the House and the Senate. So Jeff Sessions tells you why this was done and what can be done next.
Fulfill the desire of this administration to create a time period for Congress to act should it so choose.
That's why they're waiting 6 months before it's ended, to give Congress an opportunity, if it chooses to act on DACA and do something permanent. We'll talk to Steve Montenegro about that here in a few moments. The deal with the Democrats is what they're calling it. The raising of the debt ceiling for only 3 months, not for a year until the end of next election cycle, was cut with the Democrats. Along with that is hurricane relief for Harvey and Hurricane Irma, wherever Irma ends up doing the damage. While we're taping this, Hurricane Irma currently hasn't made landfall in the U.S. But we'll talk about this more because the president has cut a deal with Schumer and with Pelosi, not with McConnell and Ryan. What does that say about their leadership? There's a big question there. One of the big stories around the world is the North Koreans ramping up their rhetoric, ramping up their aggression, testing a hydrogen bomb. We knew about the ICBM that they shot over Japan. Well, now they've moved their ICBMs to the coast and closer places possibly for a launch. Nikki Haley, our UN ambassador, has said enough is enough. We will see how we act on this. The Chinese have got to get more involved. The Russians have already said they've gone to some diplomatic meetings with the South Koreans trying to figure something out because the Russians do not want to see a nuclear war either. So we'll see how this plays out. As I just mentioned, Hurricane Irma made landfall. Well, it didn't really. The outer bands crossed over Puerto Rico, did millions of dollars in damage. Puerto Rico without power, without water. There were islands outside of the edges of Puerto Rico, some of the Caribbean islands, completely devastated. One island had up to 98% of structural loss. Everything on the island uninhabitable. It's going to take years. Now we're going to watch as Hurricane Irma makes landfall in the U.S. The danger is this. If the eye of the storm doesn't cross over land, it doesn't fall apart. It stays in that tight circle. That's where those 185-mile-an-hour winds are closest to the eye of the hurricane. But on the outer bands, it's still over 100 miles an hour. If it doesn't break up in the center and dissipate, it stays a Category 3 or 4 hurricane. The fear is that that eye of the hurricane is going to stay off the coast and make its way up from Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Fort Pierce, Daytona Beach, and then up the eastern seaboard. Who knows how much damage it can do before it makes landfall? That's what we'll be watching for. Locally, Phoenix Police Chief Jerry Williams having what's called listening sessions. Not something new because of the Trump rally. These have been going on all the way back to Chief Yonner. It is a chance for the command staff of the police department and other members of the police department to hear from the communities they serve. It's that relationship is the reason that we had the good behavior for the most part at the rallies here. This is why protests aren't nearly as violent here. No broken windows. So the community came out to talk about that, and it's a congratulations to Chief Williams and to the other chiefs around the valley, because doing this in the communities is why we have such a good rapport with our police officers and with the communities that they serve. That's why we don't have the violence in our streets where other cities do. So let's just hope that we keep that going so we stay that way. Coming up in just a few moments, my friend Steve Montenegro. He is a state senator. He's been in the state legislature now for almost 10 years, and he is going to talk about the repealing of DACA, his opinion on why it's a good thing, and he comes from a place of experience. He came here as a legal immigrant in 1986. I can't wait for you to meet Montenegro. He is a very good man and really knowledgeable on this topic. So we'll do that in a moment. Before we do that, let me talk to you about the good people at Zero Res. Now, Zero Res Carpet and Tile Cleaning. We focus on carpet all the time. The fact of the matter is they do a great job on tile as well. The empowered water, great for the fabric in your carpet. Carpets dry faster, stay cleaner longer. But it will clean your tile grout like brand new. When you see your tile cleaned professionally, it looks like a new home. The special this month is a combination of tile and carpet because tile is normally much more expensive to clean than carpet. Take advantage of this special. Contact the good people at Zero Res. You are going to be thrilled. I'll be back with Steve Montenegro. President Trump repeals DACA, and it's one of the most talked about issues right now, what to do with the Dreamers. Joining me is State Legislator, State Senator Steve Montenegro. And just some background, you've been in the legislature now for how long?
10 years. Thanks for having me, by the way, Mike. It's going on 10 years now.
So your family and you, born in El Salvador, and what year did you come to America?
So it was 86.
Okay.
I was 5 years old, came here legally with my family, and it's been the best thing, obviously, the American dream.
I've often said that the biggest opponents of illegal immigration are usually legal immigrants because they understand the struggle of how to do it the right way. Is that where you stand?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the biggest thing we can do to honor immigration is understand that that's why people come to this country, because it is the country where we respect the rule of law. And immigrants, being an immigrant is an honorable thing. It's folks that want to honor what America stands for.
So when you look at the Dreamers especially, we'll talk about all of it in a moment, but what do you believe needs to happen with the Dreamers?
Well, you know, it is a very difficult subject. I mean, obviously nobody wants to fault folks for decisions that their parents made. So I think that Congress needs to figure this out, especially in the predicament that President Obama left us by making such an unconstitutional decision, now puts us into this situation. And, you know, I think Congress needs to be the one that decides.
And I've maintained that if this were a President Clinton, if it was Hillary Clinton that were president and had done exactly the same thing, the headlines would read that now she's going to force Congress to give the Dreamers permanent protection as opposed to the executive order, which was a temporary thing to begin with. I think it's being cast that way. I don't think we're ever going to throw those kids out. So do you believe there should be legal status? Should there be a pathway to citizenship for the Dreamers? What path do you, if you were giving advice to our members of Congress, what would you tell them?
Well, and first of all, I guess one of the things is we have to remember that, again, it's difficult. It's not an easy situation, but we have to remember the people that are also 10 years, 12 years, 14 years waiting in line legally. We can't forget about that. So something like blanket amnesty is just not going to work. That said, I do think that Congress, there's a deal to be made. I am hearing that if we get something like E-Verify, real border security, and chain migration, that there's conservatives that would go along with a deal like that.
And I think that for me, it's the humanitarian thing to do. These kids don't know any other home but America. And I figure when you make a deal like this, there's going to be nobody's going to be 100% happy. But you're right. I think if we don't do something with border security in this measure, it doesn't matter what they do. Because just like in the 80s, we were stuck with a predicament of amnesty then with an insurance that we'd have border protection so we wouldn't have to do it again, and here we are. And the immigration system does need to be fixed. Waiting 10 years is way too long for good people to be able to come here. There's got to be a way to fix all of this. Do you think they can get a comprehensive bill that can do all of those things?
Well, my guess, like I said, is that there are good people that are trying to make something work. I think, again, you can't have blanket amnesty because you have to think of those that are in the process now. But I think that at the end of the day, there are good conservatives that are trying to make something happen. I think at the end of the day, though, there aren't enough of them. And I think they would cave. There'll be some type of agreement, compromise. And my fear is that we forget those that are legally trying to honor the system. I mean, we've got to remember that they've also been in line. They've also paid fees. They've also honored America with trying to follow the rule of law. So I think that something is going to happen. I just want to make sure we don't forget about those.
What do you say? I'm sure you've had interactions and conversations with the Dreamers. What do you say to the Dreamers when they ask your opinion and when you tell them the same thing you just told me?
Look, this country is the most compassionate country on the face of the planet, and we've seen that before. I mean, we have so many people immigrating every year and becoming citizens into this country. So right now it's about Congress. The constitutional authority rests on Congress. Will they get something done? Can they get something done? Should they get something done? And at the end of the day, like, I think we'll see the hypocrisy from Democrats as well. because if it is only about these 800,000 folks that are stuck in this limbo, that through no fault of their own, we understand, but Congress can probably figure out a deal. But I suspect that Democrats want blanket amnesty for the millions of folks that are in their family. You know, that's where that chain migration comes in, and that's where we have to really make sure that we're looking at the subject. Is it just these folks that we want to? They're not guilty. That means that others are guilty of breaking the laws, and how are we going to handle those? So that's what's interesting. I tell folks, look, there are ways that we can get this done. Border security, making sure that we have real border security, making sure that we have E-Verify in place, and things like ending chain migration. I think there's something to be done there.
I also want to talk, we got to take a quick break, but when we get back, I want to talk a little bit about the state law here about in-state tuition and how the state universities are breaking that law and what might happen there, and how you feel about in-state tuition. If these dreamers are given legal status, are they going to be entitled to in-state tuition? So it's a very complex conversation, and I want to continue that, and then I want to find out what you're doing next, as you've got some pretty exciting things going on. So Steve Montenegro is with me. He is a state senator for now, and we're going to talk with him about all of this in DACA and what happens with the dreamers if they get legal status. We'll be back. Thanks for being here. We are with Steve Montenegro. He is a state senator here. He represents a district in the West Valley, born in El Salvador, as we said in the first segment. In-state tuition has been a big issue. The state universities are still offering in-state tuition to the dreamers. I've maintained for a long time, if the parents who brought their children here had been told, you can stay and your kids can go to school, but if they go to college, they have to pay out-of-state tuition anywhere they go, that every parent that brought their kids here illegally would sign on the dotted line in a minute for that. It seems to me to be a little bit selfish to make that demand for in-state tuition. Where do you stand on that?
Well, look, you know, there's a reason why Arizona voters have made that decision. You know, I think that Arizona voters have decided that it's just not fair to have folks receiving benefits that their own children sometimes don't get. In this case, it is in-state tuition. But the voters have spoken on this, Mike, and it's in Arizona, that's how it works.
So let me ask a personal question. Does it bother you? Do you get a lot of pushback from Puente, Arizona, or the Hispanic community in general that are pro-open borders because you're born in El Salvador? Do they have the impression that you're kind of a traitor in some way?
Oh, I get that all the time. I mean, the left likes to play identity politics, and the fact is, if you're an American of Hispanic descent or if you're a Latino, you're automatically supposed to fall in line with the left or with the Democrats. And that's just not the case. And it's not just me. There's so many folks out there that understand that. I get messages in Spanish all the time. Thank you for speaking up, and thank you for being an American. That's why we come to this country, to follow the rule of law, to understand what makes this country great, the Constitution, the values, the American exceptionalist attitude. And that has nothing to do with the color of your skin or your background. That has to do with the dream, that you want to be better, that you want to make the best for yourself and for your family. So it's vitriolic at times, it's awful, but that's just the left. That's what the left resorts to because they can't win on actual policy.
So you were, and when you were a young legislator, part of the SB 1070 proponents, and did you sponsor? Were you a sponsor? Okay,
yeah.
So when that bill was going through the legislature, it passed in Arizona by what, 70%?
Well, there was the polling was showing that there was 70+% of Arizonans supported that. You don't
get to that number in Arizona without a large part of the Hispanic community signing on board, realizing that there's a huge difference between legal and illegal immigration.
Absolutely, you know, and that's just the reality. Folks want to be treated as Americans. We don't want to be treated by the color of our skin. You know, like Martin Luther King said, the content of our character, and folks understand that. And if you're here legally, if you're here, there's more folks that are law-abiding than not.
Watching you in interviews on CNN and things, it's funny because people make that assumption and they almost look at you like, what are you talking about? Because because of the way you appear, you should be on the other side of this issue. How much of that do you have to deal with in every interview?
Well, I mean, again, when I first got elected, for the first 2 sessions, they kept putting a D next to my name, some of the newspapers and the press. Yeah, you just have to deal with it. The reality is there are a lot of folks that perhaps are not as you're supposed to. I told the screen, you know, or the interviewer, if you're looking at your screen right now and you think I'm a white Republican, you need to adjust your screen. Because the reality is there are a lot of Hispanics, Latinos that understand the rule of law, that also believe that they're Republicans. They understand how important it is to keep the values we have in this country.
What made you interested in American politics at such a young age? I mean, to go into the legislature at 26 is pretty remarkable. You're probably not the youngest person that's done it in Arizona, but
Sure.
pretty close. That's very young to do that.
Yeah, no, it's calling. For me, it's like you. What you do is your calling, it's purpose. Sometimes you don't expect it. It's not what you're planning, but the good Lord and divine destiny, I think, have a way of placing us where we need to be, and at the same time helping us achieve our calling, our purpose, what we're supposed to do. And this is what I'm supposed to do. I love Arizona. I want to make sure we fight for Arizona. We stand for what it makes Arizona the best state.
So that leads me to the final question is you're doing something else. You're running for another office, and you're running for an office that's already held by a Republican.
Yeah.
Why?
Well,
And it's the Secretary of State's office, by the
Secretary
way.
of State, yeah. The Secretary of State primaries are never fun, but we have a Secretary of State, Michelle Reagan, she's a liberal. There's no way around that. She voted for Janet Napolitano budgets that put us in the $3.5 billion deficit that we were in, that got guys like me elected in the first place to come and clean up. She's been hostile towards a lot of our conservative efforts. She was sponsoring, she helped efforts with, Kirsten Sinema to have sex education in kindergarten. I mean, it's stuff like that make her, and then the last few years we've seen what a circus and a disaster the Secretary of State's office has been. So when it comes to what I've been able to do the last 9 years, we've stood in front of every major issue, pro-life, pro-family, pro-taxpayer, champion of the taxpayer, hero of the taxpayer. We've been on every front fighting for our values and for what makes and has made Arizona great. So I want to make sure that we bring that to that office. And look, it's very evident that she's anti-Trump. She refuses to work with the president on making sure that we find out where voter fraud is. And there's not an issue there. Let's find out where the problem is. Let's fix it, and let's move on to fix other problems as well. So I want to make sure we step in that office and bring some integrity there, and make sure that Arizonans feel like that office is run with integrity. I mean, after all, people give their life for that sacred right to vote. Well,
we'll make sure the website is here on the screen so people can check out the campaign. I'm interested to see how it goes.
SteveMontenegro.com.
So I appreciate you being here. It was fun to watch what you've done in the legislature so far. I'll be looking forward to the primary. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Steve. We'll be back. Welcome back. It's time for one of my favorite parts of the show. We call it From Arizona for America. It's our way to congratulate and thank the fine Arizona men and women who have recently graduated from boot camp and are now serving in our country's military. So please join me in honoring Airman Christian Anderson from Willow Canyon High School in Surprise, Airman Bahana Lucero from Coconita High School in Flagstaff, Airman Kayla Baker from Arizona Virtual High School in Phoenix. For a list of more of our friends and neighbors that are from Arizona for America, you can go to the Mike Broomhead page at aztv.com. We'll be back in a minute with Broomhead's Best and hashtag this. Time for my favorite part of the show. I call it Broomhead's Best. All right, I was going to say J.D. Martinez, but it's really got to be all of the Arizona Diamondbacks. 4 home runs in the Dodgers in one game. He's the first person to do it in Dodger Stadium ever. But the Diamondbacks have now won 13 in a row. That is the longest winning streak in franchise history. And they've done it with 2 series against the Major League Baseball best LA Dodgers. The last series in LA. When you beat the Dodgers, I'm a happy man. But to sweep them 2 series in a row, good for you. This week, they are Broomhead's Best. Now it's time for hashtag this. A little bit more somber this time. It's hashtag never forget. Monday is the anniversary of 9/11. And all of us remember where we were when those buildings fell. What's remarkable to me is to know that there are adults now that don't really remember because it was so long ago. That's why we say never forget. We should be educating our kids and people that there's evil in the world. We were at war with people we didn't know we were at war with. They used airplanes to attack everything about American society. Our financial district in Wall Street, they went after the Pentagon, and there was an airplane that was destined, we think, for the Capitol or the White House that was taken down by brave people on that airliner. And so we can never forget the lessons we've learned on 9/11. That was a horrible time in our nation's history. It's something we will never forget, the loss of life, but it's also when we felt vulnerable. So we can't ever forget that. I'll be back here in just a couple of moments to close out the show and tell you about a very special guest we're going to have next week. Don't go away. I want to thank Steve Montenegro for joining us. You know, he takes a lot of heat because his family born in El Salvador, they're immigrants themselves, legal immigrants. I have always maintained that legal immigrants will save this country because they realize they've come from oppressed places, whether it's economically or no freedom of speech, religious freedoms, whatever it is. We are the most benevolent nation in the world. And Steve Montenegro is a great example of that, and that's why they stand up for the rule of law. It's not saying that the Dreamers are bad people. It is saying that we've got to obey the law. I believe the Dreamers will and should stay. They deserve a pathway to either citizenship or permanent residency. But we have to maintain some order with our laws and remember good people did the right thing to come here. I am very excited about my guest next week. His name is Mike McAvoy. Mike McAvoy and I became friends after 9/11 because his brother was a FDNY firefighter lost in the towers with Ladder 13. That truck was the one that was lowered into the 9/11 museum. Mike McAvoy's brother was killed, and so was his best friend who was working in the towers. He worked for a company called Cantor Fitzgerald. Mike was in Brooklyn and watched the towers come down and was at ground zero for 2 weeks, hoping and praying to find his family members, and it didn't happen. He's going to bring some of the memorabilia, and when I say never forget, he's going to help us never forget. That's all coming up next week. Thanks for joining the show. It is going to be back on next Saturday night at 5 and 10. Have a great week, everyone. God bless.
Get more of Mike Broomhead on Facebook, Twitter, and of course weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on News Talk 550 KFYI.